before time, before earth, before the first breath of life. There was only silence. A silence so vast it could not be measured. A void so dense it seemed to consume the very idea of existence. What was there before everything? What inhabited the space before the beginning itself? Every civilization that dared to imagine the origin of the world faced the same impossible question. How can the human mind conceive of nothingness? How can the formless be given form? How can language describe what exists before language itself? And in that confrontation with the unthinkable, myths were born. The Greeks named it chaos, not as destruction, but as a yawning gap, an open chasm without boundaries. For the Mesopotamians, it was Tiamat, the primordial ocean, mother of all yet enemy of the gods. Among the Norse, it was Ginnungagap, the abyss between fire and ice, where opposing forces collided to bring forth creation. In Egypt, it was Nun, the eternal waters, silent and infinite, from which the first god emerged like a lotus rising from darkness. The pattern is unmistakable. Before order, there was chaos. Before cosmos, there was the abyss. And each myth, in its own voice, sought to answer the same riddle. How does order rise from disorder? How does the world emerge from nothing? In the previous tale, the focus was the great flood, the waters that returned to swallow humankind. But now, the journey descends even deeper. If waters can destroy, it was also from them that the first world was born. Destruction and creation, two reflections of the same eternal truth. Yet beneath these ancient stories lies a question far more disturbing. Were they merely metaphors, simple attempts to explain the forces of nature? Or do they reveal something timeless about the human condition itself? Is the abyss only a memory of the distant past, or does it still dwell within us, a silent darkness waiting to rise again? Tonight, the journey ventures to the farthest horizon of imagination, the moment before time, when nothing yet was. Through shadows before the light, through silence before the word, into the primordial chaos that gave birth to all. Nothingness. A word so simple, and yet it carries a weight that almost bends thought itself. To imagine nothing is to step beyond the boundaries of reason, into a realm where language falters and imagination collapses. For the human mind, silence is still something, darkness is still a color, emptiness is still a space. But true nothingness, the absence of matter, form, and time, remains unreachable. It is no accident that every civilization, when asked to picture the beginning of existence, could not embrace the void directly. Instead, they clothed it in symbols. They gave it shape through metaphor: dark waters, a yawning chasm, a formless mist, a silent abyss. Humanity did not describe the void, it translated it into images it could bear. The very act of naming chaos is an act of defiance against it. By calling it chaos, Nun, Tiamat, or Ginnungagap, ancient peoples transformed the unthinkable into a story, an image, a myth. This was not mere poetry. It was survival. For to acknowledge that all things came from nothing is to confront fragility. If creation arose once from the void, then it may just as easily return to it. Why is the idea of nothing so unsettling? Perhaps because it confronts the deepest human instinct, the longing for permanence. To imagine a cosmos that was once not here, and may one day vanish again, is to imagine ourselves as shadows passing through a greater shadow. In myths, the abyss is never neutral. It is a force that both gives and threatens, a presence that cannot be escaped. Even modern science echoes this ancient struggle. Cosmology speaks of a singularity before the Big Bang, a state where the known laws of physics dissolve into incomprehension. Quantum theories describe vacuums not as empty, but as boiling seas of potential, where particles blink in and out of existence. The language may differ, but the haunting question remains the same. How does something arise from nothing? For the ancients, the answer was not in equations but in stories. They saw creation as a moment of rupture, when silence cracked and forms spilled into being. Some imagined it as conflict, a violent battle between gods and monsters. Others envisioned it as emergence, a quiet rising of order from waters without shore. In every version, the abyss was not erased. It lingered, surrounding the cosmos like a vast, invisible sea. This persistence of the abyss is perhaps the most chilling element of all. For if chaos gave birth to the world, then it is also its destiny. Creation does not abolish the void, it only delays it. The flood myths already told us this. Water that once gave life can also rise to reclaim it. The abyss never disappears. It only waits. And so, across cultures, the mystery of nothingness became the backdrop for every origin. The Greeks would speak of chaos, the Norse of Ginnungagap, the Egyptians of Nun, the Mesopotamians of Tiamat. Each culture gazed into the dark silence and found its own reflection staring back. What they saw in the abyss reveals what they feared, what they desired, and what they could never escape. But what if the abyss is not merely a memory of the past? What if it is a reality we carry within ourselves? A void beneath the surface of thought, the silence behind every word, the darkness that no fire can ever fully banish. Perhaps the mystery of nothingness is not just cosmic, it is personal. In the beginning, there was chaos. Not chaos as we understand the word today, noise, disorder, confusion, but chaos as the ancient Greeks imagined it, a yawning gap, a formless chasm, an emptiness pregnant with possibility. It was not destruction. It was the canvas upon which existence itself would be painted. From chaos came Gaia, the earth, solid and enduring. From Gaia, the mountains, the seas, and the skies began to take shape. In Hesiod's theogony, chaos is the first principle, the root from which all else emerges, but it is not an enemy to be conquered nor a deity with will and intention. It is an opening, a void, a womb of potential. Yet this Greek vision is layered with paradox. Chaos is emptiness, but emptiness that gives birth. Out of the abyss comes not silence, but sound. Out of the void comes not nothingness, but everything. It is as if the Greeks understood that creation does not emerge despite the absence of order, but precisely because of it. The absence itself was fertile. In this cosmogony, Eros, the force of attraction, is also born early, embodying the irresistible pull that binds beings together. Without Eros, form would dissolve back into formlessness. Without love, gravity, or desire, however one names it, the universe could not hold itself. Thus, chaos is not simply a void, it is a stage where forces of connection and separation begin their eternal dance. What is striking is the contrast with other traditions. In Mesopotamia, the primordial chaos takes the shape of Tiamat, a goddess of monstrous waters who must be defeated. In Egypt, Nun is an endless ocean that must be transcended by divine emergence. But in Greece, chaos is not slain, resisted, or overcome. It simply is. It lingers at the foundation, an eternal reminder that the cosmos is built not upon solidity, but upon absence. This subtle but profound difference shaped the Greek imagination. To them, the world was not the product of war between gods and monsters, but the slow unfolding of form from formlessness, the gradual ordering of potential into reality. Their mythology whispers an unsettling truth, that behind every act of creation, chaos remains. It is not gone, it is only hidden, always threatening to resurface. Perhaps this explains why the Greeks were among the first to ask philosophical questions about being and nothingness. Hesiod's chaos would echo later in the words of philosophers like Parmenides and Aristotle, who pondered the mystery of existence itself. For the Greeks, chaos was not merely myth, it was a concept, an intellectual and spiritual abyss. But what does it mean to live in a world born from chaos? Does it mean that disorder is an enemy we must constantly resist? Or does it mean that disorder is the very condition that makes order possible? The Greek myth seems to suggest the latter. The cosmos is not secure, it balances precariously upon the silent gap that came before it. Imagine standing at the edge of this abyss, as the first gods must have. Around you, no ground, no sky, no time. Only vast openness, unmeasured and eternal. And from this silence, suddenly, the pulse of existence, Gaia rising, Eros binding, the cosmos taking shape. It is not a triumphant victory, not a conquest over chaos, but a trembling emergence, fragile and incomplete. The Greeks knew this fragility well. Their myths are filled with moments when order collapses, when hubris invites ruin, when the carefully balanced cosmos trembles under the weight of human ambition. Perhaps this too reflects the memory of chaos, that lurking reminder that behind the beauty of order, the void still waits. The Greek chaos is not a monster slain in the past. It is the condition of existence itself. A gap at the heart of the world, a silence beneath the noise, a shadow under every light. To speak of creation, for the Greeks, was to speak of emergence from absence. And in that absence lies both fear and possibility. If the Greeks imagined the beginning as a silent void, the Mesopotamians saw it as a restless sea. In their most enduring cosmogony, the Enuma Elish, creation begins not with emptiness but with the mingling of two eternal waters, Apsu, the fresh waters, and Tiamat, the salty seas. Together, they formed the Primordial Abyss, a boundless ocean without shore or horizon. From this dark union, the first gods emerged, fragile sparks rising from infinite waters. Yet the gods themselves brought disturbance. Their voices echoed, their movements churned the depths, and the quiet equilibrium of the abyss was broken. Apsu, weary of this noise, sought to destroy them. But the plan was discovered, and Apsu was slain by the younger gods. His body became part of the world's foundation. Tiamat, the mother of monsters, rose in fury. She birthed an army of abominations, serpents, dragons, and storm beasts, to avenge the death of her companion. The abyss itself became weaponized, chaos embodied in monstrous form. And so begins one of mythology's oldest dramas, the war between order and chaos, between the new gods who sought to shape the cosmos and the primordial waters that resisted them. At the center of this war stands Marduk, the storm god. Armed with nets, winds, and a bow that never misses, he faced Tiamat in combat. The battle was not merely physical, it was cosmic, a clash of principles. Tiamat was the embodiment of raw, untamed creation, infinite and undifferentiated. Marduk was order, structure, the will to impose boundaries on the boundless. When Marduk struck, the universe itself trembled. With his net he trapped her, with his winds he filled her body, and with his arrow he pierced her heart. Tiamat collapsed, but her death was not the end. From her vast carcass, Marduk created the world. He split her body in two, half became the heavens, half the earth. Her eyes became the sources of the great rivers, her tail the arc of the heavens, her blood the clay that shaped humanity. Here, creation is not gentle emergence, as in the Greek imagination. It is violence, dismemberment, sacrifice. The world is not born from harmony but from slaughter. To live, the cosmos had to be carved out of the body of chaos itself. And though the younger gods declared victory, the price was eternal. The memory of the abyss lives on in the very substance of existence. This myth carries a chilling implication. Order is always provisional. It is not natural, but imposed. The cosmos is not a stable foundation. It is a battlefield. The world is literally made of chaos's remains, haunted by the waters that once resisted form. Every act of life takes place upon the corpse of the abyss. Why would the Mesopotamians imagine such a violent beginning? Perhaps because their world itself was precarious. The land between the Tigris and Euphrates was fertile but dangerous. Rivers that gave life could also flood and destroy. Kingship, cities, and law codes were fragile constructions that had to restrain ever-present forces of disorder. To the Mesopotamian mind, creation was not a gift freely given but a victory painfully won, and one that could always be undone. Even the role of Marduk reveals this worldview. His triumph over Tiamat was not simply myth but ideology. In Babylon, Marduk's victory justified the city's supremacy, its kingship ordained by cosmic order. Rituals each new year reenacted the battle, reminding the people that the abyss still threatened, that chaos was never far away, and that only by honoring order could life continue. Yet beneath the political function, the myth whispers something more profound. Creation requires destruction. The very possibility of form demands the tearing apart of what came before. To shape the world is to mutilate the infinite. And so, unlike the Greek chaos that simply opened space for life, the Mesopotamian abyss resists. It must be fought, subdued, and remembered. But Tiamat's death was never final. The waters remain, surrounding the earth, pressing at its boundaries, reminding mortals of their fragility. Every storm, every flood, every collapse of human order was a sign that the abyss still breathes beneath the world's thin surface. Creation, in this view, is not the end of chaos, it is the temporary damming of its tide. And so, when the Mesopotamians gazed into the darkness of the beginning, they did not see silence. They saw a roaring sea, a mother of monsters, a battle that carved the cosmos from blood and bone. To them, the world was not a sanctuary. it was a scar. Where the Greeks spoke of chaos and the Mesopotamians of primordial waters, the Norse looked back and saw a gap, an endless void of silence and possibility. They called it Ginnungagap, the yawning emptiness that stretched between realms before there were realms, a gulf so vast that it lay beyond comprehension. But unlike the still waters of Nun or the dark womb of chaos, Ginnungagap was not uniform. It was a place of tension, of polarity, of collision. On one side lay Niflheim, a realm of frost, mist, and biting cold. On the other, Muspelheim, a world of fire, sparks, and unbearable heat. Between them, the abyss waited. And when the breath of ice met the breath of fire in that formless gulf, creation began. From the melting frost, life emerged, the giant Ymir, vast and formless, whose body was the first living being. Alongside him came Audhumla, the primeval cow, who nourished him with her milk and licked the salty ice until another figure was freed, Buri, the ancestor of the gods. Thus, in the Norse imagination, life was not spoken into being by divine command nor sculpted from clay by loving hands. It was born of collision, of frost yielding to flame, of matter forged in extremity. Ymir himself was both progenitor and threat. From his body, more giants emerged, and with them the echo of chaos. The gods, descendants of Buri, rose against him, just as Marduk rose against Tiamat. The pattern repeats. Creation demands destruction, order arises from a corpse. Ymir was slain, and from his immense body the gods shaped the cosmos. His blood became the oceans. His flesh became the soil. His bones the mountains, his skull the vault of the heavens, his brain the drifting clouds. But unlike Hesiod's chaos, which simply receded into the background, Ginnungagap never disappears from the Norse imagination. It lingers as the silent backdrop of all existence, a reminder that the universe was born from extremes, from the endless war of opposites. Fire and ice remain, waiting beyond the edges of the world, threatening one day to undo what was forged between them. This vision of beginnings is not accidental. The Norse lived in a world where nature itself was merciless. Long winters of ice, sudden bursts of fire from volcanoes, storms that destroyed without warning. For them, creation was fragile, balanced precariously between annihilating forces. Existence was not safe, it was temporary, carved out of chaos at great cost. And the myth hints at something more disturbing. The same cycle that began creation will end it. Just as the world arose from Ginnungagap, so too will it return. At Ragnarok, fire and frost will meet again, and the cosmos will collapse into the same abyss from which it came. The void is not only the past, it is also the future. In this, the Norse worldview carries a unique darkness. Where other cultures celebrated creation as a triumph, the Norse saw it as a fleeting pause in an endless cycle of destruction and rebirth. The cosmos is not secure, not eternal. It is a temporary fortress built from a giant's corpse, doomed to fall back into the abyss. And yet, there is a haunting beauty in this vision. For if existence is precarious, it is also precious. Every flame burning in the cold, every harvest surviving the frost, every act of courage against overwhelming darkness is given weight by the knowledge that it is temporary. The Norse myths remind us that creation is not guaranteed. It must be fought for, sustained, and defended against the abyss that waits at the edges. Ginnungagap, then, is not just a place. It is a principle, the eternal gap between opposites, the tension that gives rise to being. Without the cold, there would be no warmth. Without the void, there would be no world. The abyss is both threat and origin, silence and song, emptiness and possibility. To gaze into Ginnungagap is to confront the heart of Norse cosmology, a universe born not from harmony but from struggle, sustained not by permanence but by defiance. It is a myth that whispers a truth still felt today, that existence itself may be nothing more than a fragile spark struck in the darkness, trembling above an abyss without end. If Mesopotamia imagined the beginning as a violent ocean and the Norse as a frozen gulf between fire and ice, the Egyptians looked deeper still and saw a boundless expanse of water. None. Unlike the monsters of Tiamat or the threatening abyss of Ginnungagap, Nun was not a creature to be slain, nor a void to be conquered. It was eternal, silent, infinite, the waters before creation, without form, without shore, without time. In Egyptian thought, Nun was not simply the past. It was always present, surrounding the ordered world on every side. Creation did not abolish it, but emerged from it, like an island rising from a limitless sea. To live in Egypt, where the Nile both nourished and destroyed, was to feel this truth daily. Order was a fragile island floating upon infinite waters of chaos. From none, the first mound rose. This was the Benben, the primordial hill, symbol of the first land to pierce through the flood. Upon this hill, the god Adam emerged, self-created, self-sustaining, a flame rising from dark waters. Unlike the gods of Mesopotamia or Greece, Adam did not fight or tear chaos apart. He simply rose, separating sky from earth, setting in motion the slow unfolding of Ma'at, the principle of cosmic order. Yet, none never vanished. Even as Adam created, none remained in the background, eternal and watchful. To the Egyptians, the world was not built on the corpse of chaos but precariously suspended within it. The yearly flood of the Nile was a reminder. The waters that give life can also reclaim it. Creation was not a final event. It was an act that had to be renewed, defended, and sustained against the lurking presence of none. The Egyptian priests told many variations of this cosmogony. In Heliopolis, it was Adam who rose from the waters. In Hermopolis, 8 deities called the Ogdoad embodied the elements of pre-creation: darkness, infinity, hiddenness, and the primordial waters. In Memphis, the creator was Ta, who shaped the world through thought and speech, yet still emerging from the same abyss. Different cities, different gods, but always the same truth. Before order, there were waters. Beneath order, there are waters still. What makes none unique is its passivity. Tiamat rages. Emer breeds chaos. The Greek chaos opens into possibility. But none waits. It does not resist, but neither does it vanish. It is the eternal backdrop, the dark canvas upon which the fragile brushstrokes of creation are painted. In this sense, none is perhaps the most terrifying of all primordial forces, not because it is violent, but because it is indifferent. This indifference haunted Egyptian religion. The pharaoh, embodiment of divine order, was not only ruler of men but guardian of the balance between Ma'at and none. Rituals, offerings, and the ceaseless repetition of cosmic patterns were not symbolic. They were necessary to keep the world afloat. Without them, the waters of none might rise again, dissolving the island of creation back into formlessness. It is telling that in Egyptian funerary texts, none often reappears. The dead king journeys across dark waters, guided by spells and prayers, seeking to avoid being swallowed by the abyss. The afterlife itself is imagined not as escape from none but as passage through it. Even death cannot silence those waters. They surround, they permeate, they wait. Philosophically, none suggests a chilling insight, that chaos does not need to rage to undo creation. It only needs to exist. For what is fragile can fall back into the formless without resistance. Order is not inevitable. It is an interruption. And yet, there is a strange serenity in this vision. The Egyptians did not picture creation as a battle but as emergence, as flowering. Just as the lotus blooms each dawn upon the Nile, the cosmos itself bloomed from none. Creation was fragile, yes, but also continuous, renewed with each sunrise, each season, each ritual. The very act of daily life, building, farming, honoring the gods, was a quiet defiance of the waters pressing on every side. Thus, none is not simply darkness. It is also potential. It is the nothingness from which light emerges, the silence before speech, the shadow against which form becomes visible. It is at once threat and necessity, terror and promise. Without none, there could be no creation, for it is from its depths that the first mound rose, the first God breathed, and the first word was spoken. To imagine none is to imagine eternity. Not eternity of life, but eternity of waiting, of water without waves, of silence without end. The Egyptians lived with this abyss daily, knowing that their order was not guaranteed but constantly negotiated. And in this fragile negotiation, they built pyramids, carved hymns, and sought immortality. For they knew the truth. One day, perhaps, none will rise again. Across Greece, Mesopotamia, the frozen north, and the sunlit Nile, one image persists. Before creation, there was something else. A void, a chaos, an ocean, an abyss. Cultures separated by distance, language, and climate turned to different metaphors. Dark waters, empty gaps, colossal monsters, but all circled the same truth. Creation is never imagined as effortless. It is always precarious, always born against the weight of something immeasurable. In Greece, chaos was a chasm, neutral, silent, yet filled with possibility. From its openness came Gaia, the earth, and Eros, the binding force of attraction. Here, creation was emergence. There was no monster slain, no war fought, only the slow unfolding of form from formlessness. Mesopotamia offers a harsher vision. For them, the abyss was Tiamat, the salt sea, furious and alive. Creation required violence. The world was shaped from her corpse, the skies and rivers carved from her body. Chaos was not possibility but resistance, not neutral but hostile. To live in Mesopotamia was to see order as fragile, imposed by force upon waters that always threatened to return. In Norse tradition, the abyss was Ginnungagap, the yawning void where fire and ice collided. Creation was born from tension, from the meeting of opposites, from extremes that both destroy and generate. The first life, Ymir, was itself a paradox, sustained by frost and fire, yet too immense to coexist with order. His death, like Tiamat's, became the raw material of the cosmos. Here, the abyss is not neutral nor entirely hostile, but dynamic, a place of violent opposites clashing until something new emerges. And then there is Egypt. Their abyss was none, endless waters without wave or voice, eternal and indifferent. None does not rage. None does not fight. It simply waits. Creation was emergence, a mound rising from the flood, atoms stepping forth, Ma'at establishing balance. Yet none never disappeared. It encircled the world, pressed upon it, and promised its eventual return. Where Mesopotamia feared chaos as enemy, and Greece embraced it as possibility, Egypt treated it as eternal background, not conquered, not erased, only endured. The similarities are striking. Every culture imagines creation as interruption. Existence is never secure. It is always carved out of something older, something more powerful, something darker. The abyss is not erased by creation. It is hidden beneath it, waiting, eternal. But the differences matter too. They reveal the psychology of each civilization. The Greek chaos reflects a culture that sought philosophy, balance, and explanation. The Mesopotamian Tiamat reflects a people surrounded by floods and wars, where survival demanded conquest. The Norse Ginnungagap reflects a land of harsh extremes, where existence felt always threatened by the collision of ice and fire. The Egyptian Nun reflects a civilization of cycles, of floods and rebirth, where order was a fragile island floating upon eternal waters. Beneath these myths lies an archetype, the Primordial Abyss, a universal memory of humanity's encounter with the unknown, projected onto the beginning of time. Psychologically, the abyss may represent death, the unconscious, or the fear of non-being. Philosophically, it represents the question that cannot be answered: why is there something rather than nothing? Spiritually, it embodies the tension between order and chaos, permanence and impermanence. Even today, the archetype lingers. Scientists speak of the singularity before the Big Bang, a moment where space, time, and physics themselves collapse into incomprehension. Philosophers debate the nature of nothingness, whether it is absence or hidden fullness. The abyss survives, not in mythic poetry but in equations and theories, still pressing against the edges of knowledge. And perhaps this is the greatest truth the myths reveal, that the abyss is not only behind us, in some distant past, but beneath us, around us, and within us. Every life begins with a kind of emergence from chaos, a separation from darkness, a fragile spark in an ocean of silence. Every civilization builds its temples and laws as islands rising from the waters of disorder. And every death is a return, a dissolution, a sinking back into the formless. The Greeks saw it as potential, the Mesopotamians as threat, the Norse as collision, the Egyptians as eternity. Different names, different faces, yet all part of the same shadow, the archetype of the abyss. To compare them is not to flatten their differences, but to hear the harmony of their echoes. Each myth whispers the same unsettling truth, that existence itself is fragile, precarious, and temporary. The cosmos is not a fortress built on solid ground. It is a raft drifting on waters without end. Order does not banish chaos. It borrows from it, rises from it, and will one day sink back into it. What then is the abyss? Is it the enemy of life, or its foundation? Is it threat or promise? Perhaps it is both. Perhaps creation and chaos are not opposites at all, but companions, endlessly circling, endlessly shaping one another. The myths leave us not with answers, but with questions. And perhaps that is their greatest gift. For in asking what came before the world, humanity is also asking what lies beyond it, and what lies within us. Before the world, there was always something else. Greece spoke of chaos, Mesopotamia of Tiamat, the Norse of Ginnungagap, and Egypt of Nun. Each culture, separated by centuries and distance, found different names, different faces, but the same shadow. The abyss. It is the silence beneath every sound, the darkness behind every flame, the infinite ocean beneath every island of order. It is the reminder that the cosmos is fragile, that creation is not a fortress but a pause, a trembling interval before the waters rise again. The Greeks taught that chaos was potential, the first opening that allowed existence to unfold. The Mesopotamians warned that chaos resists, that the world is carved from violence and must be defended. The Norse imagined creation as collision, fire and ice clashing in a void that still surrounds us. And the Egyptians whispered that chaos is eternal, patient, indifferent, encircling the world and waiting for its return. Different stories. Different symbols. Yet all speak the same truth. Order is temporary. Civilization, law, belief, these are rafts adrift on waters without end. The abyss is not gone. It never left. It is the beginning and, perhaps, the end. And perhaps this is why the myth of the abyss still lingers in us. Science tells us of a universe born from singularity, a mystery beyond comprehension. Philosophy still trembles before the question, why is there something instead of nothing? And deep within, every human feels it too, the silence that waits beneath thought, the emptiness that no fire can fully banish. The abyss is not simply a myth. It is a mirror. It shows us the fragility of our world, the precarity of our existence, and the inevitability of endings. But it also shows us possibility. For just as the abyss threatens, it also gives. From its silence came every word. From its emptiness came every form. From its waters came life itself. So we return to the question, what is the abyss? A void of terror, or a womb of creation? An end, or a beginning? And if it surrounds us still, pressing at the edges of our world and our minds, then perhaps the real question is this. What happens when the abyss awakens again?